Lori Stewart is joining me to present this workshop on affordable housing. And Kathy, if you want to put up the first slide on the Legislative Action Committee. There goes my voice. Okay, we are part of the Legislative Action Committee, which is a state league committee currently made up of 24 legislative specialists who are the driving force behind the league's advocacy work. Each specialist has at least one area that she covers, sometimes several. On the State League website, you can see the list of bills we are following this legislative session, arranged by area and specialist. We're lucky because affordable housing is right at the top of the list. The specialists determine what legislation LWVMA supports. We write testimony, provide information about actions that local leagues and members can take. We organize education events such as Meet the Specialist and Day on the Hill. We facilitate the Legislative Envoy program and monitor bill progress as these bills go through the legislature. So the work of the specialist is guided by LWVMA's program that is renewed every 2 years at convention. The League has supported affordable housing for many decades at all levels of government. Most of our position is part of the national Meeting Basic Human Needs housing supply position that can be found on the LWVUS website and in the publication Impact on Issues. Also relevant is the national position on equality of opportunity, fair housing. We also have a state position that is found on the LWVMA website and in the publication Where We Stand. Later, we'll also talk about supporting local affordable housing, and that would be based on your local positions as well as the state and national positions. We're going to begin by talking about 4 of the bills that we have chosen to support this term. We'll have a brief time for questions about each of the bills that you can ask live or type into the chat, and also a time near the end of the hour. If we can't answer questions, we will research the answer and communicate by email. So Lori is going to do the first 2 bills.
Hi, my name is Lori Stewart, and I'm very excited to be here. This is my first legislative session being a housing specialist, and it's been great working with everybody on the LAC. Both bills that I'm going to speak about today deal with eviction. And everybody has been watching the news, and we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the housing crisis to a head, both in Massachusetts and nationally. And the Biden administration is prioritizing local enactment, long-term housing stability strategies. And the first bill that I'm going to talk about, and then I'll take questions, is House Bill 1436, and the Senate bill is 874, An Act Promoting Housing Stability and Homeless Prevention in Massachusetts. And this bill has been dubbed the Right to Counsel bill. Right to Counsel seeks to level a playing field in court, prevent displacement, and provide housing stability for low-income and vulnerable people in our community. The U.S. Treasury, Justice Department, and the Housing Department recently stated in a joint letter addressed to state and municipal leaders, they encouraged them to enact housing stability strategies, including the right to counsel. And they said, tenants are more likely to avoid eviction and remain stably housed when they have access to legal representation. Recently, the National Women's Law Center stated, the eviction crisis is a woman's crisis. The right to counsel can help. Year after year, most landlords are represented in courts by attorneys, while nearly all tenants go into court alone. In Massachusetts, more than 20,000 new eviction cases have been filed this year. And there were over 90% of the defendants were unrepresented, compared to just 16% of landlords who did not have an attorney. Right to counsel seeks to address this inequity. And this year, statewide right to counsel bills have been passed in Washington State, Maryland, and Connecticut. Okay, my slide is up. This bill, as you can see, would provide all tenants and owner occupants of 1 to 3 family dwellings whose incomes are over 80% or less of the area median income, with full legal representation in all eviction cases. And this would be funded specifically by a dedicated general court appropriation administered by the Mass Legal Assistance Corporation. Individuals would be notified about their eligibility for right to counsel by their landlords when they issue notices to quit and summons and complaints in covered proceedings. There shall be a reasonable continuation of proceedings if an eligible tenant, occupant, or owner occupant does not receive notification, or if legal counsel does not have time to file responsive pleadings. I have a whole bunch of facts about how this particular bill, these bills, right to counsel, affect women, if anybody wants that information, but I can see that I'm starting to run out of time, so I think I'll stop and take questions.
Laura, Laura, you have one question from the chat. Can you explain how an owner-occupant can be evicted by the bank who holds the mortgage?
I don't have the information on that, but I'm happy to research it and get it back to you. This is coming from Nancy Goodman.
Good. Right. Okay. No, I guess you have to.
I was just curious, because it's usually the owner that's evicting a tenant.
Yeah.
Right.
So
There was a bill last legislative session where the goal was to cover both small landlords who are not wealthy, as well as the tenants. And there are a lot of landlords that have signed on to this bill. Right now, there's a coalition of at least 200 members. Beacon Properties, Wynn Properties, Trinity Properties, several housing authorities have signed on, and they believe that tenants should have a right to counsel in eviction cases. As I said, I'm going to put something in the chat, and if you want any more information, you can sign up for alerts from the right to counsel, and there is a fact sheet. Hopefully these links work. All of the statistics that I have read, which I haven't read all of the statistics, but they're all backed up by good sources. And when you get the fact sheet, there wasn't a huge opposition 2 years ago. In fact, the association, I'm not sure I'm going to get this name right, but the Landlords Association actually started to see the benefits of having right to counsel when pieces of this went through the econ development bill. But I could look into that more and get more current information for you.
Okay. I think Josephine McNeil had her hand up.
Hi, I just actually put a note in the chat. The
Okay.
owner isn't going to be face eviction. What the owner will be subject to is foreclosure, because he or she cannot afford, because they're not getting their rent, they can't afford to pay the mortgage.
Right.
Okay.
And by protecting the homeowner against foreclosure, you also save apartments for people to live in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Anne Marie Alonso is asking, where is this bill in the process?
There hasn't been, this is in the Joint Housing Committee, and they haven't scheduled a hearing for this yet. But there's some information I'm trying to find for you. There was a hearing in July of 2021 before the Joint Committee on Ways and Means and House Committee on the federal stimulus money and census oversight on ARPA funding of right to counsel. A number of states are trying to use ARPA funds to fund this program initially for 2 years. And
Okay. And is there organized opposition from Debbie Edmonds?
right, what I said before is that I could look into that a little bit more. There is an association of landlords, and they are very vocal. And what I had previously said was that they were sort of warming up to the idea.
Okay.
But I can look into that more.
Okay. And Stephen Bader says an owner-occupant small landlord might need to evict a tenant, but not have the funds to hire a lawyer to help. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, I can comment on that. Yeah, that may be the case, but right now, tenants have no right to legal counsel, and it is expensive to go to housing court. And I'll just reiterate the numbers of the 20,000 evictions that have been filed this year in Massachusetts. 90% of the tenants went unrepresented, while only 16% of the landlords were unrepresented. So there's a vast inequality there, and that's what this bill is hoping to address.
Okay. And then I think Josephine McNeil was also already answered. I don't see any more questions at this point, so reserve them, and hopefully we'll have time for more later, or you can go on to email to deal with them. So Lori, do you want to go on to your second bill that you're talking about?
Absolutely. The second bill that I'm going to speak about is House 1808, Senate 921, an act promoting housing opportunity and mobility through eviction ceiling. And this bill has been dubbed the Homes Act. Due to a free, unrestricted, and public access to the Massachusetts trial court's case management system, masscourt.org, eviction records are being used as an informal tenant screening tool, resulting in homelessness. As soon as an eviction case is filed, regardless of the outcome or whether the tenant is actually evicted, the tenant has a permanent and public eviction record. Tens of thousands of tenants every year who face eviction are impacted by this. These bills would protect tenants from being unfairly marked with an eviction record and automatically seal all eviction cases as soon as they are filed until an allegation is actually proven. Tenants presently have no available recourse to seal an eviction case. Regardless of age, merits, or outcome of the case, a tenant's eviction record is a permanent black mark on the tenant's history and often results in the tenants being unable to find housing in the future. Recent laws in California, Colorado, Illinois, Nevada, Washington, D.C., and New Jersey have allowed tenants to seal evictions cases. Other states are considering similar laws. The Homes Act would automatically, as I said already, seal eviction cases as soon as they're filed until an allegation is proven. It would also seal no-fault evictions where the tenant is not at fault, make non-payment and fault eviction cases publicly available if there's a judgment against the tenant on the merits, or if there's an agreement for judgment and the tenant has actually been evicted. It would seal all eviction records after 3 years and provide a process to seal records for good cause before the 3-year point. It would provide a process for parties, their attorneys, and other representatives to view a sealed case online so they can manage their cases remotely. And it would assure that tenants satisfy their judgments or agreements for judgments, that if they do that, they can seal an open record. There are a lot of facts and figures that I don't have ready today on the cost of people getting evicted and what happens through Department of Children and Families and other agencies that serve people that become homeless due to an eviction. And I don't have them today, but I will get them for people. I'm ready to take questions at this point. I think I saw one in the chat. Oh, I should know who's sponsoring these bills. I don't have it right in front of me and I'm a little nervous. Can I get that for you?
I think, I have,
You have it, Claire?
yes, the chiefs, on the one you're talking about now, on the eviction ceiling, it's Senator Joe Boncory and Representative Mike Moran.
Right.
And the one that you did before, right to counsel, it's Senator Sal DiDomenico and Representative David Rogers and Michael Day.
Right. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, just let's see, do we have any more on this? Anyone else have a question? I don't, on my view, I don't have everybody. No, I don't see. Okay. I don't think I'll have time to put them in the chat, but we can add that to the information we send out, the sponsors of the bill. And you should know that you can get information online from the legislature on all bills. That's something that is a good thing for league people to know, that it's so easy to get this kind of information online. And those of you who are on Zoom probably have a computer.
And I'm going to put in the chat one more time links to how you can get email alerts on Right to Counsel and Homes Act and fact sheet and sample testimony. The Homes Act right now had a hearing. I don't know the date of the hearing, but the coalition thinks that it went very well. Testimony is still being taken and there's an opportunity to testify. There are no links in my chat. Oh goodness.
I don't think the links are active when you, it looks like when you'd have to write out the whole link, I think.
Oh, okay. I don't have access to that right now, but this will be sent out because this is important. I will send that out to all of the participants.
Okay. Okay, I think then we can move on to the next bill, which is, Kathy, can you put up the next slide?
Sure.
Okay, the bill that I'm going to discuss is House Bill 202 and Senate Bill 111, an act improving emergency housing assistance for children and families experiencing homelessness. Families with this bill allows families who are homeless or at risk of losing their homes to be placed in shelter immediately and not to be turned away because they don't have the correct documents in hand or have not spent at least one night in a place not suitable for sleeping. The rule, which is on the slide, has been used for at least 6 years to be sure that families have actually lost their homes, and it's been opposed by the League and other organizations for quite a while. Where do those who are turned down go? Often they end up doubling up with relatives or friends, but many of them spend their time in their car, if they have one. Sometimes they're camping out in good weather. They spend a lot of time in restaurants or libraries, in a tea station or hospital emergency room. And when you're doing this, of course, your regular activities of daily living are pretty hard to carry out. How do you wash up? I mean, there's no bathing or showering, changing clothes. Where do you sleep? For children, doing homework or even playtime is nearly impossible. We don't have good statistics in 2021 because of the pandemic, but I do have some just before. In June of 2020, there were 3,098 families with children in the shelter program. During the 19 to 20 school year, which is the last regular school year, and even that was interrupted to some degree, public schools reported serving 24,777 homeless students. So this is not a small issue. And at least 300 families per month were applying before the pandemic, with about 40% turned away for one reason or another. So this bill provides for emergency placement immediately, not waiting a day or two. And even a night or two in an unsuitable place puts children at risk and may traumatize them. And adults certainly are affected too. Lack of documentation such as birth certificates, proof of residence, or income should not postpone an emergency placement. The bill makes Department of Transitional Assistance records available so that people don't have to go and get another birth certificate, another proof of their income if they've already been through this with DTA. And an ombudsperson unit is established by the bill to assist applicants with their personal issues around emergency housing. This is something that caseworkers do follow now, but having a unit that's particularly tasked with this would make it a lot more effective. Also, the bill requires that reporting of ombudsperson services and oversight hearings are required, again, to make sure that there's some look at what's been happening and to help plan and improve services. Do you have questions about this bill? I'm going to, okay.
There isn't anything in the chat at this point.
Okay. I have to get to the the gallery to see if there are hands. Any hands raised? Well, I'm glad you all see the point of this bill anyway. It seems like it's a fairly obvious one. Josephine McNeil, I see your hand.
Yeah, the question is, what if all the emergency shelters are filled? Is there any language in the bill that suggests an alternative if there is not, because I think that's part of the problem, that there
Yes, it
aren't enough
is.
shelter beds. So to have this bill without some reference to that seems incomplete.
Well, the state traditionally has used hotel rooms and motel rooms as a backup to the shelter system. And the state also has the ability to rent housing for people. So they have options that we probably don't know about other than the formal shelters. And people do consistently move out of shelter, although that was very slow during the pandemic time. So there is a turnover of some people leaving every month and new people coming into the established shelters.
Yeah. I'm aware of what was there before. In fact, I was a big advocate against with closing down the hotels and motels, but I still think it might be a good idea for the league to suggest maybe some addition to this bill that specifically calls out options in the event that the shelters, are not full. I think what happens, and again, maybe part of the problem, and this is, I'm glad that it speaks to an ombudsman, but if the ombudsman can't really provide a realistic alternative, it's one thing to put words into a bill. It's another thing for it to be able to be actualized. And I think that's what we need to focus on. Not just bills, but outcomes. Is the bill serving the purpose that you want it to serve?
Yes. I think your statement is very on target. I think it's important to recognize that these are not the only bills on housing, on affordable housing in the legislature. And the legislature also has to, in their budget, provide enough money for the services. Sometimes that's the issue because there are other programs like the RAF program that provides money for people to stay in the apartments they already have and so on. So this is not the only program. This is a suggestion in a new bill going a new direction and actually directing the housing the housing department within it's the Executive Office of Housing and Community Development. It's really directing them to place people immediately and not wait a day or two to place people. So I think the important thing is this bill is not a standalone bill. It's one thing in a whole system that's fairly complicated. But I hear what you're saying. We have definitely supported other legislation in the past and will continue to see that people actually have options.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Are there questions in the chat?
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay. All right, then I'll move on to the next bill. Let me just get my. Okay. So. All right, the next bill that I'm discussing is House Bill 1373 and Senate Bill 867, an act promoting fair housing by preventing discrimination against affordable housing. This bill is intended to stop discrimination and segregation in housing and land use that were historically supported by government actions. For example, in the past, Black families were often not allowed to buy land or homes in certain areas, and also subsidized housing was often segregated by race. I mean, there are many other actions too, those are just a couple. In this bill, government that is referred to is local and state administrative, legislative, or regulatory bodies. And some examples would be the building and permitting agencies, housing authorities, your local zoning, and state legislation. But there are many agencies and so on that do affect who gets housing in various ways. I'm going to actually read the next section. I don't like to do that, but just to make sure that I cover the things that this bill deals with. So there are three categories of discriminatory land practices. The first one is excluding families or individuals with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. That's what AMI stands for. Second is limiting accommodations with sufficient bedrooms for families with children, including those with more than 2 bedrooms. And third, this is a long list, and I think it's important because it's really one of the broadest lists I've seen for discrimination. So excluding families or individuals based on race, color, religious creed, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, genetic information, ancestry, marital status, veteran status or membership in the armed forces, familial status, disability condition, blindness, hearing impairment, or possession of a guide dog as a consequence of disability. So I think it's trying to cover pretty much all known cases of discrimination that they know of. I'm going to have to take some water here. Sorry. And in this bill, there's provision for local or state government to defend against lawsuits. They have to show that they have been consistently supporting non-discriminatory housing and that there is a government interest in the action. Examples might be housing for specific disadvantaged groups like those with mental health issues or veterans. And civil actions are limited to 3 years after a violation by aggrieved parties or the Attorney General, and that's to avoid lengthy uncertainty of particular developments. So I can take questions now. No, look at the view. Okay. Stefan Bader.
Thank you. Could this be used to say that any zoning that is against, that prohibits multi-family construction is discriminatory?
I don't think it deals with multiple units so much as the number of bedrooms in the units. Now, that doesn't mean they can't have some units that are smaller, but if it generally prohibits families, that is the issue. Anyone else? Josephine McNeil?
Yeah, is this, I be clear, is this a bill that the State League is supporting?
Yes, this is one of the bills we are supporting.
So how do you, or if you do, match this with, or how does this mesh with the current state and national fair housing laws? Because the number of categories in this bill is so expansive that I don't even know how one would go about, if it's a law, so you can bring a case. How would a plaintiff bring a case? What would be the especially the ones that are not in the current law?
I can think of one. Do you have an
Okay.
answer for that, Claire?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I just saw an email this morning that there's a demonstration in Jamaica Plain. There's a brewing company. I don't remember the name of it, but this is the second time they've filed a lawsuit to prevent affordable housing. The first one was against Pine Street Inn, and the second one is senior housing. And so there are two businesses filing legislation to prevent affordable housing. And it's my understanding that that would not be allowed.
Right, but you don't need this law to do that. That's already in state law and federal
Yeah.
law. So my question is, this is so broad. I don't know. I really be curious for some legal analysis, frankly, as to how this is really, how do you enforce this? Sort of, how does a locality deal with this? Because it seems to me that you could get bogged down in any development that it's not enough to just say affordable housing. Affordable housing, by the way, is not a protected category. What is protected is gender, race, religion, age, in Massachusetts, source of income. So if you have a Section 8 voucher, somebody can't say that is not a national law. So I would really be interested in knowing what, like the Fair Housing Center of Boston or the state would what their reaction to this particular statute would be, because
Right.
I think it's problematic.
This bill has not come up for a hearing, and we certainly will be listening to what comes up when there is a hearing on the bill. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer the specifics of this. I think the intention is certainly to go beyond the categories that have been enumerated in the law before, so that it is truly dealing with a lot of the subtler forms of discrimination that may come up.
Oh, I guess.
Also, I think that I think is there. That's why I think they do have some defenses in there for the government bodies, and also limiting the length of time that people can bring a suit.
Yeah, but I think that those might be red herrings, frankly.
Okay,
Yeah, so I am a
I
lawyer,
hear that,
so
and
I really would advise the league to do a little more study of its own before you take a position of endorsing it, and thereby endorsing, sort of telling the rest of the members of the organization to do so. I think the bill is problematic. Often when you don't want something to happen, you put in language like that, because then if you put that language in, the likelihood of there being success, a meritorious claim, is not likely to make it through the legal system.
well, I would welcome you to communicate with us, any sources of information that you have, because this is something that I'm not prepared to analyze in the way that you're suggesting. Yes, the other thing is, this is a new bill. This is the first year it's been around, to my knowledge. And a lot of times, bills like this take many sessions of the legislature to really get passed or be seen seriously. So, anyone else? Sorry.
I have a quick question.
Who is, Meredith Mason Crowley.
Hi, how are you? I'm from Winchester. Would a change in the zoning status of a property where a community designates property for affordable housing, if it's then changed out of being affordable, is that considered discriminatory? Would that be part of this bill?
I'm not sure
Are you saying if it were taken out of something that was designated for affordable?
Yeah,
I would think it could be seen as something subject to a suit,
yeah. We're currently,
but I would not, I'm not the one to make that judgment.
okay.
You said there was something, there's something going on in your
Yeah.
town? The
Yeah,
woman
we
that-
have a current, we currently have a very large project that we're trying to put through for affordable housing. And there is a lot of disagreement about it. Whereas the location of it could be considered very valuable. And if it were luxury housing, it could, garner more taxes for the community, but we previously designated for affordable housing. So there's currently quite a bit of discussion about it. And so we did designate it for affordable housing. So I'm just wondering if that would be something that would, if there were a fight put up to change the status of it, considered discriminatory.
Right. Well, in my mind, it would be discriminatory, but I'm not the one to make that decision. Also, keep in mind, this is a proposed bill. It has not yet been passed. So you couldn't use this particular bill as a reason to sue. But if such a bill were passed, it may cover situations like that.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good. Okay, is there anything in the chat?
No,
Okay.
Lori, there's a question, I think, from one of your bills from a little bit ago. It says from Meredith, it says, I would like you to elaborate on why tenants have no rights to legal representation in an eviction. Do you mean they do not have the financial ability to pay and therefore are underrepresented legally?
well, I did answer the question. I thought I sent it to everybody. I might not have, but my answer to that is yes, tenants do have a right to pay for legal counsel. But if in the criminal justice system, if you commit a crime, you are given a public defender. And this bill is addressing low-income tenants who can't afford to have representation in housing court for an eviction, which is a catastrophic event for people. And so what I'm saying is that, yes, pet tenants don't have the money. They do have a right to pay for legal counsel. I can give an example of how much some, evictions cost. I was being evicted 10 years ago, and it cost me $8,000 to defend myself, and I was never evicted. But I do have an eviction record. So some of these items are very personal to me. I had family that helped me, and not everybody has that. So tenants, there's just a vast inequality in housing court where, I quoted the recent figures of 90% of the tenants are unrepresented as opposed to 16% of the landlords. And that's a big inequity.
Okay. All right. I want to mention that we are also sponsoring 2 other affordable housing bills for this session that we're not discussing this morning. And you can look, as we said, you can look at the League website and get more information about them. One of the bills is House 1428, Senate S.898, an act codifying the mass rental voucher program, and we also sponsored that last session. And the other one that may be of interest to a lot of people is House 3049, an act to increase community preservation revenue. The matching funds for community preservation have been spread thinner as more communities have come into the program. So communities are not getting the amount of money that they had. And some of the community preservation funds are specifically designated for affordable housing. So those are a couple of others. And we have been asked to sponsor other bills. To some extent, it's our time and efforts are fairly limited. And the league has a lot of bills in other areas that are being sponsored too. So we have to kind of limit ourselves and choose a few.
Claire, I was alerted that Nancy Bettinger had her physical hand raised for
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry. Okay, Nancy, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, so my question is just whether or not, for example, the last bill that you talked about, that you had a slide for, had a coalition behind it that had produced fact sheets or bill summaries, because sometimes those materials could be really helpful in answering some of the kinds of questions that have already come up.
Yes. Okay. Well, I do know that CHAPA, the Citizens Housing Organization, is supporting that bill. I frankly didn't find their fact sheet very helpful. So I could send it out to people, but it really doesn't give much information. I think the reason was that they had their housing day very early in the session. And as we know, this session was very slow to get started. I'm not even sure it had been assigned to a committee at that point. So I will look for more information certainly on this. But I think it's also because it's a new bill this session, it hasn't really gotten a lot of people behind it.
Thank you.
I am not aware of any particular coalition.
My bills, the bills that I discussed have coalitions behind them.
Right,
Yes.
right, right. And then we're going to move on now for a little bit of discussion on local action. One of the things we want to emphasize is that local action on affordable housing is necessary. We can have all these lofty positions on the national and state level, but in the end, nothing's going to get built unless the local communities get behind it too. So there's a great shortage of housing in the state, not only subsidized affordable housing, but also lower priced rental apartments and houses for ownership that used to be called starter housing or workforce housing. So the whole gamut of housing for lower income folks below the median income is very much in short supply. And you may know the issue in your own community as prices have just gotten astronomical. So another issue is that most of the subsidized housing that we have is located in Boston and the larger cities. And we know that people are on the waiting list from every community in the state. So the smaller cities and towns also need to be doing their part. So building anything new relies on local zoning decisions and votes of boards and town meetings, and maybe even some local funding, even though there is funding available from the state and federal governments. So Lori is going to talk a little bit now about the situation that she's seen in Salem.
Okay, a few years ago when the Salem chapter was forming, they had an open meeting and they had everybody put down what type of issues they'd like to see the league work on. And one of the highest one of the most popular issues was affordable housing. So we started an affordable housing working group to study affordable housing and learn more about it. And I'm the chair of that group. We meet once a month on a Saturday morning. And we started at the beginning, assuming that people knew nothing about affordable housing. And because affordable housing has a lot of terms that are difficult for new people to understand. And then our group just got bigger and stronger, and there were a couple of local initiatives that we signed on to and supported. One of them was inclusionary zoning, which is a way to get private developers to build affordable housing and not have to, the city not have to pay for it, because Salem's a city. That did not pass because it needed a supermajority of the city council votes, or 2/3. And some of the councilors did not like the density bonus. And they also felt that the number of affordable units should be much, much higher than 10%. Which sometimes isn't always feasible for the private developer to do. So the other local initiative that we worked on that was successful was we backed accessory dwelling units, which are our local ordinance is actually interesting because we did put a cap on the rents. I think it was 70% of the fair market value. So people can build ADUs now in Salem, but they do have to keep them at a lower price. In general, though, accessory dwelling units are considered lower A affordable housing, in that they're not really deed restricted or income based, but they just happen to be smaller places to live, and therefore get less rent, owners get less rent for them. But I certainly encourage people to get active on the local level. It's very exciting, and it keeps us very active in Salem.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question about or make a comment about their own local situation? Sorry for my coffee. Michelle, Nathan, did you have your hand up? Can you unmute?
Just had a quick question. You know, I see like Cushing Square. I don't live in Cushing Square, but I see all these, you know, crowded buildings together. I get the sense that the town didn't have a lot of say in this. I guess my bigger question is, so when developers come in, it seems like the developers always have the upper hand in the power. So I wonder if somebody with more knowledge can speak to how it can work for affordable housing when developers seem to be less receptive.
I think many of us have had that impression. Obviously, they have the wherewithal to hire experts who can find ways to evade local things that have been set up that have been favorable to affordable housing. The only way we can go against that is to do our homework and find ways that we can actually assure that it happens.
Right.
Henry Lanza?
Oh, yes,
Hi.
and Marcia Johnson has her hand up as well.
Okay.
So I just want to say, so we're in Wellesley, and I want to say that, Lori, we were so inspired by your work up in Salem that we talked to Lori last year we did a housing study, and this is just how we got started in housing. We did a study and came up with a new housing position. Our old position was from like the 1970s. And what really inspired us, Lori, is that we've reinstituted our Observer Corps, which we hadn't done in many years. And we're going to specifically focus on trying to monitor housing conversations. So I think that goes to the developer comment as well, is the important thing is to know what's going on. So we're going to try to, and it's so easy today with all the meetings on Zoom and they're on TV, but we're going to assign people to just follow housing and report back so that we know when things are happening and we can get involved early. So I just want to give a plug for that and to thank Lori for her inspiration.
Thank you.
Marcia Johnson, thank you for that question. Marcia Johnson had her hand up.
Yes, let me lower my hand first before I forget. So I'm from Newton, and Newton has a very active set of organizations that support affordable housing and advocate for that, both at the city council level, through our zoning board of appeals for comprehensive permits. So it's really having the voices out there, and the more voices that you have, we've had some partnerships with our environmental groups, our bicycle and transportation advocacy groups, because we created a mixed use zoning ordinance probably back in about 2013 or 14, Josephine, something like that, I don't know. And has enabled us to build some fairly large developments here in Newton. And with those, because we have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and Josephine McNeil was instrumental in the creation of that. I won't say how long ago, Josephine, but I know it was 20 years, because I was involved, I think, in iteration number 2. So the inclusionary zoning ordinance is important, but you really need to look at making sure that you have the right split of percentage of area median income. And one of the things that we are doing in Newton is really to push for units in these developments that are lower, in the 60% or lower, 50% lower percentages, because those are your most needy. You get into the 80 to 100, 20%, that's workforce housing, and frankly, they are more difficult to rent. So there's a whole different, I don't know, we're not sure why, but anyway, we're really trying to focus on the lower end. And the league over the past few years here in Newton has been very helpful, and our voice is very powerful in supporting various developments that have affordable housing. So keep it up. It does work.
Okay.
It is. Sometimes it feels like your back has got a target on it, but just keep going.
Well, thank you all for your comments. I think we're coming to the end of the hour. Remember that this session has been recorded, so we'll send you the link. You can listen to it yourself or have your friends listen to it. And we will try to get information out to you for things we didn't answer. And you can always email us through the league office. Thank you all for attending.